Hi, today we're going to start the integumentary system and we're going to talk about all the different things that go along with the integumentary system. For example, this is going to be your skin, so it's going to be the skin and the different appendages that go with it. So we're going to talk about the skin, we're going to talk about hair, fingernails, glands, and things like that. So going into the different functions of the integumentary system, it helps with protection from disease and external injury. So on top of your skin, there's all different types of microorganisms. These microorganisms, if they were to be able to get into the inside of the body, would actually use that as a food source or could actually damage the inside of the body. So the integumentary system or the skin is able to keep those things out in order to keep you healthy. It also helps protect the internal structures from the outside. So it helps it from external injury. It helps from protection of water loss. Yes, you do lose water throughout the day through your skin. However, that skin has a lot of keratin in it and it's going to actually help keep a lot of that moisture in. Another important thing that the skin's able to do is help with temperature regulation. You have sweat glands that are going to be located within the dermis part of the skin that when activated are going to release sweat in order to cool your body down, but it's also going to contain a lot of capillaries. These capillaries, when they need to release heat, are going to go dilate and go more towards the surface of the skin in order to release that heat. Or if you're cold, they're going to constrict and kind of dive deeper into the skin tissues in order to keep that heat in and help you stay warm. Sensory reception for hot, cold, pressure, touch, vibration, and pain are all going to be picked up by nerves that are going to be found within the dermis. So you're going to find different ones that will be able to pick up on whether you're getting too hot, whether you're getting too cold, and basically send messages to the brain about the surrounding environment. It helps with communication that way, and it also will excrete certain things. So on top of excreting water at certain times, it also can excrete things like ammonia and urea. Now these things you'll get rid of with the urinary system through your urine, but they can also be excreted through the skin as well. These will be built up, especially ammonia is going to be built up from breaking down certain components, nitrogenous wastes that come from food that your body breaks down and reuses. It can also excrete things like carbon dioxide and salts. And then at any given time, you're going to be able to find about 8 to 10% of your blood supply in the skin. So it's going to be a blood reservoir. Our skin's also going to be responsible for absorbing UV light. It's going to do this by using cells within the skin called melanocytes. Melanocytes have a pigment called melanin, which helps them absorb this UV light and then distribute it throughout. As it's doing this, it helps protect the skin and prevent damage to the DNA, so mutations that would be done to the DNA. And it can absorb this UV light and help it synthesize vitamin D that our body needs. So how do we synthesize vitamin D? Cholecalciferol is going to be a precursor to vitamin D. We take this in through our foods, and it's also going to be found in the skin. So if you take it into your food, it will then go to the liver. If you take it in through your food, or if you take it in through the sun, you have it in your skin, it's going to actually activate it and send it to the liver. So cholecalciferol is going to be a derivative of a steroid produced by the body. And remember, steroids are going to be sterols or cholesterols that are produced within that smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So it's changed into calcitriol when it reaches the kidney. So it's going to go through the liver, then hit the kidney. The kidney's going to change it to calcitriol. That's then going to stimulate the large intestine to take in more of that vitamin D from the food and calcium, and that's going to stimulate the bones to absorb calcium and phosphate ions. So that's going to help give you strong bones, strong teeth. And here is a visual of that. So you have that sunlight coming in. You have that steroid compound. It's going to turn into that cholecalciferol. It goes into the liver where it forms the intermediary product. If you look over to the food side, you're just simply taking it in as a food. So it comes in as dietary cholecalciferol, still goes to the liver. From the liver, it then goes to the kidney where it becomes calcitriol. That in turn stimulates the calcium and phosphate ion absorption in the intestines. So absorption of lipid-soluble materials, things like vitamin A, vitamin D, E, and K, and certain drugs like cortisones, poison ivy oils, organic solvents like acetone, and some heavy metals like lead, mercury, and arsenic. So all of these are going to be things that are going to be soluble materials that can go through the skin. Transdermal administration of drugs is going to be a type of drugs that you're able to administer through the skin or through your cutaneous membrane. So if you're going to be a doctor or nurse, you might use one or some of these types of medications with your patients. Birth control patches are going to be one, because it's going to actually be a hormone or a steroid that's going to be on that patch. You could put it on the arm and it goes directly through into the system. Scopolamine is going to be a motion sickness drug. So if you have any type of seasickness, motion sickness, this is the type of drug that they could put on a patch and actually put into the skin. Nitroglycerin is going to help prevent chest pains in people with heart problems. Estrogen replacement therapy is going to be a type of drug that can be administered transdermally. And nicotine patches for those who are trying to quit smoking. Lots of times they'll get a patch and they'll put it on the skin and it gets administered transdermally. Now let's break that word down really quick just so you understand what's going on. Trans means across and dermal means skin. So that just simply means that these things will go across the skin and into the bloodstream. And then there's the fentanyl. And fentanyl is going to be a pain relief for cancer patients. And this is going to be very important to those patients. They just stick patches, fentanyl patches on the skin, and it helps relieve extreme amounts of pain. The skin is the integument. And so with the skin, it's going to be consistent of two distinct regions. You have the epidermis. With the epidermis, epi means upon, dermis is going to be the skin. So this is going to be the superficial region of the skin. So it's towards the body's surface. This is going to consist of epithelial tissue that we studied in the last chapter of histology. So it's going to be made up of a stratified squamous epithelium. The dermis lies just below the epidermis, and it is going to be made up of mostly fibrous connective tissue. So it's going to be a dense, irregular connective tissue along with some areolar connective tissue. Underneath that, you'll find what's referred to as the subcutaneous layer. The subcutaneous layer sometimes is referred to as a superficial fascia. It's not technically considered to be part of the skin, but it helps with some of the skin functions. It's deep underneath the epidermis and the dermis. It's not going to actually be part of the skin, like we said, but it does share its functions, and it's mostly going to be made up of adipose tissue. So you're going to find a lot of those adipose cells or fat cells there. That is going to, in turn, let's go back to that, help to absorb shock and help insulate. Let's move this up. Help insulate the body. So that layer is going to be very important. All right, so looking here at this picture, this shows you how the skin actually lays on and connects to the rest of the body. This is showing a portion of the chest. So these bones that you see here are going to be rib bones. So looking at the outer portion, the skin is going to be the purple section or the epidermis. The dermis is what you see there in pink. And then you're going to have your hypodermis that you see there as a superficial fascia. And so that shows those adipose tissues or adipose cells there, the fat cells. Underneath that, you see what's referred to as the deep fascia. And that deep fascia is actually what's going to be separating these different layers in the body. So the epidermis is going to be connected to the dermis. The dermis is connected to the hypodermis, but that deep fascia is actually going to separate the movement of that top layer that we consider to be the skin, even though the hypodermis isn't really considered part of the skin. That's going to allow it to move as a unit separate from the muscles, which is going to be important. So it's not all going to be attached and tight there. It's able to have some flexibility and some movement. Now that deep fascia, you're going to find between the different layers of muscle that you see there. That's going to allow those muscles to move independently from the outer skin sections or the dermal sections. And if you look at the subserous fascia, it's going to allow it to move separate from that subserous fascia. Now the subserous fascia is going to be a connective tissue between serous membranes and deep fascia. Mainly it's going to be areolar connective tissue, and that's actually going to separate like the serous membranes and the wall from the inside of the body cavity and the muscles. So then it can actually function separately from those two. So here's a diagram of the skin. You need to know this diagram. You're responsible for knowing this diagram. You need to know all the parts of this diagram. I can't emphasize it enough. All right, so starting over on the left-hand side, we have the epidermis. Now with the epidermis, let me go ahead. It's going to be this smaller section here that you see on the skin. That's going to be made up of many layers of many layers of squamous epithelium. So it's going to be stratified squamous epithelium. And on top of that, it's going to have some dead keratinized cells there. So it's going to be considered to be stratified keratinized squamous epithelium. Now going down deeper, you're going to have the dermis. The dermis is going to be about 2/3 of that skin layer, and it's actually going to be divided into two separate parts. The first part you're going to have is going to be this wavy layer that you see up top, and you'll see how it waves around. That's the papillary layer. Now with the papillary layer, it's going to have those nice waves and ridges, and that's going to be important in increasing the surface area. And so that increases the attachment of that surface from the epidermis to the dermis. Also, you're going to see some capillaries, which you'll see these vessels here going in. So you're going to have those capillary plexuses that are going to exchange nutrients and oxygen for carbon dioxide and waste for that epidermis, even though the epidermis is going to be considered to be avascular. Notice how they do have these capillary structures here closed in order to give them the nutrients and the things they need and to take away the waste products. The reticular layer is going to make up most of the dermal layer, and that's going to consist, like we said, of dense irregular connective tissue along with some areolar connective tissue. Now in there you're going to see that's where most of the things are, or most of the things you're going to find within the skin structures are going to be found. So in that you'll see blood vessels. So the red are going to be arteries, the blue is going to be veins, and then so you see the little loops, those are going to be capillaries. That's where the exchange of the nutrients and oxygen and the taking of carbon dioxide and waste products occurs at the tissue level. And then coming across, you see the subcutaneous as the bottom portion. And so all of these yellow adipose cells down at the bottom, those are there for your insulation and there for actually taking care and cushioning those sections. Coming up through there, you'll see nerve structures. So the ones that go up towards the top, or the ones that have like the free nerve endings, like you'll see here, they'll pick up on things like rough, smooth, pain, hot, cold, things like that. And then you'll have things such as the lamellar corpuscles. That's going to be these here that look like circular structures. These are actually going to be there. They pick up on pressure. So they're going to be found deeper or closer towards that subcutaneous layer. And then you'll see the hair follicle receptor, which is going to have some of those free nerve endings on the outside. If you've ever pulled out a hair or plucked a hair, you know it is painful. That's because you have these nerves that are wrapped around that hair follicle. And you also have blood vessels that'll go up in through the center of that hair bulb. Okay, coming on over to the other side, these ridges on that papillary layer are actually going to be referred to as dermal papilla. Now those actually are also going to help create things like your fingerprints, and they'll create the different ridges and things that you see on your skin. You have that subcapillary plexus that's showing you those capillaries again that are feeding the tissue of the top layer and the epidermis. You'll have sweat pores. The pores open to the outer portion of the skin, but notice how those ducts will actually come down until where you see that sweat gland. The sweat gland looks like a ball of yarn or something like that. So sweat pore then comes down to the gland. Now you're going to have two types of sweat glands. You're going to have what's referred to as the eccrine sweat gland. This one's going to be found closer towards the surface of the skin. This is the one that releases the product that's going to actually help cool your body off. So this is the actual sweat gland that helps you sweat and cool the body if you're too hot. Going down further, you'll have some that you find deeper, which I don't see in this picture. Those are referred to as the apocrine sweat glands, and those are the ones that are activated at puberty. So we'll talk about those later. They just create a musty type smell. Okay, next you have this muscle here. That muscle's called the erector pili. That muscle's going to help the hair stand up on end. So if you get a cold chill or if you're scared or something like that, that's the muscle that's going to tighten up and pull on that hair to cause it to stand up. Next, you have your sebaceous gland or the oil gland. Those are always going to be attached to the hair. And so you'll see those there. They kind of look clumpy. And so they create sebum, or the oil that comes out through with the hair. Now, if you notice, the hair is actually going to just be an extension of the epidermis, but it does dive deeper into the dermal portion of the skin. And next, coming on down, you have what's referred to as the hair follicle, which is going to be the upper outer portion, and then the hair root, which is going to be found within. Okay, going into the epidermis, this is going to be made up, like we said, of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So this is going to be the outer skin or the outside skin. You know this because it's dry. How do I know it's dry? Because I see keratinized. This is going to be made up of 4 or 5 distinct layers. First, we're going to start from the deepest or the inner portion. So we're going from the bottom up, and that's going to be the stratum basale. The stratum basale is going to be is the layer that's going under mitosis. And so as it goes under mitosis, it then pushes it up into another layer. That layer is referred to as the stratum spinosum. From the stratum spinosum, it then turns into the stratum granulosum. Then in some skin, but not all, on places such as your hands and feet where you might have calluses, you might have the stratum lucidum. So this is only going to be found in thick skin, not in all skin. And then you have the stratum corneum. That's going to be the uppermost portion of the skin. Now going into cells of the epidermis, you'll have some referred to as keratinocytes or keratinocytes, just depending on what book you use. Lots of times when you use one book versus another book, you're going to see that they're called different things, or they might be referred to as different things, or they might have several different types of names, but all of those names will be correct and all could apply. All right, so what these keratinocytes or keratinocytes do, they will produce a fibrous protein called keratin. This protein is going to be waterproof, it's going to be very tough, it's indigestible, and so this actually helps that animal in a protective sense. So it produces lamellar granules. These are going to help waterproof the skin. Most of the cells of the epidermis are going to be these, so it's going to be about 90% of your epidermal cells, and they're going to be tightly connected by desmosomes. So if you remember going back from our histology and the cell chapters, these desmosomes, remember, are going to hold these cells together tightly so they work as a unit. Melanocytes is going to be another type of cell that you're going to find within the epidermis. Now the melanocyte is going to be 8% of those epidermal cells. They produce a pigment called melanin. Now melanin is going to be responsible for absorbing UV radiation, and they're going to be packaged into small little packets called melanosomes. Intraepidermal macrophages, intra meaning within, inside, or Langerhans cells, these are both the same type of thing. So here's another example of how you could use either name and it be correct. These are simply going to be macrophages. They are key activators of the immune system. So these are going to be the cells that are constantly wandering and roaming throughout the skin, looking for things that don't belong. So these are going to find those things, they'll surround them, and they'll destroy them. So they're looking for microbes that could cause you to become sick or ill. Then you'll have tactile epithelial cells referred to as Merkel cells. These are going to aid in detection of touch and touch sensations. So they're there for like feeling and receptors. All right, so here's taking a look at these different types of cells. You see the keratinocyte or keratinocyte. It's going to have those keratin fibers or protein fibers that you see throughout. Over at the melanocyte, you see those melanin granules, which are the melanosomes, and that's going to be filled with the pigment melanin that's going to help absorb and distribute the UV radiation. Down at the bottom, you have the intraepidermal macrophage, or the Langerhans cells. Those are going to be the ones that are searching for things that don't belong. So they're looking for microbes such as bacteria or viruses. And then you have your tactile or Merkel cell, and that's going to be there attached with that sensory neuron to help pick up on sensations. Here is looking at a slide of skin. And so with this, we know that this is going to be outer keratinized skin. I can tell that by looking at the different layers. When you start down, you have your corpuscle of touch and that dermal papilla. And so you see the ridges from the dermal papilla. Then you'll see that stratum basale, and that is going to be those cells that are undergoing mitosis and dividing. Going up above it, you see that stratum spinosum. And then as they go towards the top, they turn into stratum granulosum, where they're going to get grainy and actually start to die out because they're getting further and further away from their blood supply. Then it goes into that stratum lucidum. And that is another key thing that, hey, this is going to be skin found on the outside, because remember, that's only found in tough skin, skin that could actually get calluses and things like that. And so you have a layer of that stratum lucidum, and then you have the stratum corneum on top. With that stratum corneum, notice how none of those have nuclei inside of those. So there's no nucleus. So that tells me that these are going to be cells that are dead. These are going to be the ones that are the outermost protective cells. They are filled with keratin, and so they're going to help waterproof and protect that skin. And these are going to be the ones that you shed as dead skin cells. And here's an artist's rendition that you can see going from deep to superficial. So the epidermis towards the top, you see those different layers. And then you can look over at the lower layers where you see your tactile disc, your sensory neuron that takes it to the main nerves. You see that melanocyte in the dermis. That's this one that's going to be found throughout here. You can see the macrophage that is here. And you see this cell here going through mitosis. So that looks like anaphase, where it's starting to spread apart, and then telophase, where it's going to pinch off and then pop into two. Okay. So what we're going to do is go through each layer of the epidermis so you understand what each one of them does. So the stratum basale, the deepest layer, or the layer towards the bottom near the dermis, it's going to be firmly attached to the dermis. It's going to be a single row of stem cells, and these cells are going to be actively mitotic. So they're actively going through mitosis. So as they divide, it's going to produce two daughter cells. One of those daughter cells is going to journey from that stratum basale layer up towards the surface, and the other cell is going to stay towards the bottom. Now, it's going to take 25 to 45 days to go from the bottom layer all the way to the top. And as it goes to the top, it's going to die as it moves to that surface, kind of like what we saw in that picture. It's not going to have a nucleus, and it's going to start to fill up with those different keratin fibers and become tough and waterproof. And so with those, as it moves towards the surface, it gets further and further away, like we said, from its oxygen supply and from its nutrient supply. And so therefore it will die out. And then, like we said, one of the cells is going to remain in the stratum basale, known as the stem cell that's going to be there. The melanocytes are going to be present in this layer, and so you're also going to have tactile epithelial cells within this layer. Next, we move on to the stratum spinosum, lots of times referred to as the prickly layer. This one's going to be 8 to 10 cell layers thick. The cells are going to contain a web-like system of intermediate keratin filaments that are going to be attached to desmosomes. Remember, desmosomes are going to hook these cells together. They're going to be a strong connection between the two cells, but it's still flexible, so that skin still can move without ripping. It's going to be abundant in macrophages that are going to be scattered amongst those keratinocytes or keratinocytes, and so they're looking for anything that doesn't belong. Next, we're moving on to the stratum granulosum, or referred to as the granular layer. This is going to be thin. It's only going to be about 3 to 5 cell layers thick. The cell appearance changes as it goes towards the top. Here, they're going to start to flatten out. The nuclei and organelles are going to start to die and disintegrate out because they have moved away from their food and oxygen supply to the point where they're not receiving sufficient amounts of that nutrients now. The keratinization is definitely going to begin, so you see lots more of those keratin fibers being produced. The cells are going to accumulate what's referred to as keratinohyalin granules. They're going to help form the keratin in the upper layers, and then the cell's going to accumulate lamellar granules. Their job is to become water resistant. They use what's referred to as a glycolipid to slow water loss. Now, we lose water constantly through our skin, but this helps slow some of that water loss. And cells above this layer are going to start to die. So the reason that they're going to die is because they are going to be too far away from the dermal capillaries. The next layer is the stratum lucidum, or the clear layer. That's going to be the layer that we refer to on thick skin or tough skin that can be calloused. This is going to be found on fingertips, palms, and soles of the feet. It's a thin, translucent layer. It's a band of superficial stratum granulosum. It'll have about 4 to 6 layers of flat, dead keratinocytes. Then we go into the top upper layer, and this is going to be the most superficial layer, is the stratum corneum. This is going to be 25 to 30 layers of dead, flat, keratinized keratinocytes. They are 3/4 of epidermal thickness, so you're going to find a lot of the thickness up here. Functions of this layer are going to be to protect the deeper cells from environment and from water loss. They're going to protect from abrasion and penetration, and help barrier against biological, chemical, and physical assaults. So it's an overall protective layer. Cell differentiation in the epidermis. You're going to have cells that change from the stratum basal to the stratum corneum layer as they go up. Remember, they're going to start to die out, become keratinized, and they're going to lose their nucleus, and then you would eventually lose those or shed those. It's accomplished by a specialized form of apoptosis. Apoptosis, if you remember from regular biology, is going to be cell death. So it's a controlled cellular suicide. The nucleus and organelles are going to start to break down. The plasma membrane is going to start to thicken, and it's going to allow those cells to slough off as dandruff and dander. You're going to shed around 50,000 cells every minute. If you think about it, that's a lot of cells. If you look around and notice that there's a lot of dust in an area, that's going to be made up of about 80 to 90% of human dead skin cells. And so if you're in a classroom and it has dust in it, that dust is pretty much made from you and from your classmates if you look around. So you're leaving a piece of you behind every time you come to class. It's going to take about 4 to 6 weeks for a new layer to form. And looking at this here, this will actually show you, this is a microscope slide of what that skin looks like. So you see that stratum corneum on top. Those are those dead skin cell layers that you're going to shed off. You have the stratum lucidum, so we know this here is either going to be on the hands or on the feet. You have the stratum granulosum, that's where they are dying off. The stratum spinosum, the stratum basale, and then that basement membrane that's attaching them there to the dermis. Going into the dermis part. The dermis is going to be composed of areolar and dense irregular connective tissues. Many collagenous fibers and elastic fibers are going to be found within this layer. So the collagen fibers are going to give it strength. The elastin fibers will give it elasticity. The functions: attachment site for the epidermis, contains blood vessels that are going to feed the epidermis, contains sensory receptors that are going to pick up on information. It's going to contain glands such as sebaceous glands. Those are going to be your oil. You have sweat glands, which are watery fluid, cereminous glands, which are there for earwax, and mammary glands, which create milk. So looking back at the hair diagram that we talked about, or the skin diagram we talked about, you'll see these different types of glands throughout the skin. So starting out with that dermal layer, you have the papillary layer that's composed of areolar connective tissue. The dermal papillae are going to be small ripples which extend into the epidermis. Most contain capillary loops, so they're going to be feeding that tissue that's going to be in the epidermis and feeding the upper layer of that dermal tissue. Many contain Meissner's corpuscles. These are going to be touch receptors. Some contain free nerve endings, and that's going to signal to the brain about warmth, coolness, pain, tickling, itching, any type of touch there, smooth, rough, things like that. And make up epidermal ridges they're going to help make up your fingerprints. So like we said, those ridges, those ups and downs are going to give you your whatever print you might have on your skin or on your fingertips or on your feet. So looking here at a fingerprint, it's going to show you openings of sweat gland ducts, and then you have friction ridges. And so those friction ridges are going to help you grasp things, grab things, and be able to pick them up or move them. Going into different types of fingerprints, you have different surface patterns. So friction ridges are going to create those fingerprints. And you'll have what's referred to as the arch, the loop, and the whorl. How are epidermal ridges adaptive? The folds are going to be there. They help increase surface area. Remember, with increased surface area, you're going to be able to increase the absorption. You're going to increase the ability to take things in, to grab things. You're going to increase contact between the epidermis and the dermis. It provides for greater strength, provides for greater grip. Next, we're going into the reticular layer. It's going to be composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. Its elastic fibers are going to provide stretch and recoil properties. Remember, this is going to be the layer that consists of most of the things that you're going to find in the dermis. You also have collagen fibers. Those are going to be there for strength and resilience. It's going to help bind water. It also contains structures such as blood vessels. It'll contain nerves. It has your sebaceous glands or oil glands. It's going to have your sweat glands. It's going to have hair follicles in those areas. It's also going to join the subcutaneous layer. So lines of tension are going to be, here we go, skin markings. So you can look at these. They're going to indicate the predominant direction of underlying collagen fibers that are caused by natural tension areas in the body. So if you're a doctor or a surgeon and you're going in and you want to cut, you're going to cut parallel to these tension lines and not perpendicular. This is going to allow it to heal better and cause less scarring. Next, we have what's referred to as flexure lines. Those are going to be the lines that you find where your body's going to bend, and that's going to be the ones on the hands. So you see the ones on the digits or the fingers, and then you see the ones on the palms. Next, we have what's referred to as striae. Striae are going to be silvery white scars. So these are going to be what we refer to as stretch marks. They usually start off as purpley or red lines underneath the skin where the skin tears. And then over time, as it begins to heal, you get left with these silvery white lines on your body, and those are scars. So these are the stretch marks. This is caused by extreme dermal stretching or tearing that occurs. It could be due to a pregnancy. Lots of times the skin is stretching because the body's growing very rapidly. Also, it could be due to growth spurts. You can have them, for example, if you grow too tall, you can have horizontal striae across your back. Bruises are going to be leaking blood vessels in the dermis. So if you are hurt and you damage that blood vessel and it starts to leak underneath the skin, it will create, usually at first, a blackish blue or purplish color to it from the buildup of the blood. And then over time, as it starts to heal and get well, it'll turn a yellowish to a greenish color. And then blisters are going to be fluid-filled pockets that separate the epidermal and dermal layers, usually because of some type of friction that has caused them. This is where we are going to stop for the day, and we will come back to this and pick up where we left off for section 2 of the integumentary system.